Everyone knows about the DOD and the American government or the United States government and the DOD things. What they didn't know is before DOD or sometime in there, if you spelunkered around the Pentagon, what you'd see deep within the archives was actually GOD. I believe, I forget. I don't know which one came first, but there's a couple different programs. They always say DOD, and blah 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 blah. It's supposed to stand for Defense Department, whatever. But what they don't, but what most people don't know about is that there are several different programs. There's DOD, and then there's different groups, and one of them, believe it or not, like I say, was the GOD, also known as God. Anyway, though, it's a God program or a God project, except it wasn't really a God project. It was what they called government authorized delusions. Now the thing is, though, that of course authorized starts with an A, so it really should be GAD. But anyway, though, I don't know. But anyway, they put it down there. There's DOD, and then there's GAD, and there's actually a few different basically projects. Anyway, but basically GOD stands for pretty much government authorized delusions or delusion, which basically, believe it or not, applies to if I can get it, applies to this right here. Anyway, yeah, this is just a book for one thing. For another thing, anyway, though, but the GOD actually basically, I mean, this is just basically a written book, pretty much. And there's of 300. If you go back about 3,000 years, like I say, what you really want to do is go look at the archives. Like I said, there's a few archives still left where you can find the actual seats, where you can find all these old scrolls. Because there used to be just stories, or this book used to be filled with basically adventures or logs, basically. And it was just a combined things of basically what happened and pretty much stuff like that, like a logbook, basically. That's all it really was. Anyway, though, but GAD or GOD basically applies to pretty much the Holy Bible, and is basically how pretty much the what the government did as far as printing this book and also other things, and basically applies to the Vatican and all that stuff. Like I said, the Vatican is nothing more than just a mine, and if you go back and you notice the Vatican actually in the golden chair, you also notice basically the golden chair is actually part of a dining room set that featured a golden dining room table and another golden chair just like the other one, and a couple other smaller golden chairs. If you look at that, look at the fabrication logs, and they're more commonly known chairs that were actually made out of cast iron. But there was a dining room set of gold and a dining room set of silver also made, like I said, and so anyway, somehow the Pope ended up sitting on the golden throne. And eventually, they melted it down for coins or something like that, or just took it and did something with it. I don't really know what. Like I said, if you looked underneath the Vatican, what you'd find actually is about a 3,000 deep mine. There's actually a great big mine underneath the Vatican. And there's even a list of showing all the different mining tunnels that were directly underneath the Vatican. So anyway, it's a deep mine for about two or 300 years, and basically that's all the Vatican really is. Basically a big mine, and there used to be a smelter, and I think they might have made some guns or swords and some cannons. Yeah, but that was a long time ago, like I said. So anyway, later on you get the printing presses in Delvin and some other stuff. Like Delvin, mostly notable. Delvin is mostly notable for the posters that it created. The very first color posters, which is basically a bird with a blue background, and it was printed on special paper. Anyway, that was Delvin, or the town of Delvin, somewhere in Europe, basically. And anyway, and then later on, you start hearing things like devil. Anyway, that was like I don't know, a couple hundred years ago, a couple thousand years ago. I'm not exactly sure, but basically, it was two white birds and a blue background. And it was a very expensive poster at like $80 or $50, something like that. But equivalent price was like $3 or $5. But basically, that was back in the old days. Anyway, though, and then pretty much at some point in time, you basically get the GAD or government authorized delusions, which basically applies to fake news. Basically, they just post a bunch of fake news and a bunch of fake stuff, and basically that's what they call a government authorized delusion, which is basically rearranging what you know of as your history, like saying that this person did this, that person did that, blah blah blah, all that stuff. Anyway, and basically what you also find out, of course, is that basically there was the Christ Cup, of course, where they said that they found the Creator's or Jesus's blood on there, and they've DNA typed it to either a pope or some president, basically. Pretty much, I think it was either the Pope or JFK, pretty much. And like I said, JFK was actually Richard Nixon, of course. So after a facelift, if you actually looked at his DNA structure, you would find out that there are 30 JFKs or Richard Nixon. He cloned himself in 1920. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And there's actually 2 Jackie Kennedys or Jackie Onassis, basically, and she was just a nurse. So anyway, like I say, I don't really care. But basically I named the American government and everything else like that. Anyway, though, basically Nixon, JFK, the same guy, basically, and there's 30 of his clones. He cloned himself like 30 times or created 30 little children, basically. And like I said, later on, they were suppressing the fact that twins were available, and that the twins actually existed, and other things like that. And they were also they were also doing the Crystal Cathedral stuff, trying to say that the Crystal Cathedral could actually heal people by, of course, having sick people with cancer and other things go in, and they would go, and the person would go, "Be healed!" And then they would go and they would, actually first they would go and say, and show that this person was sick with a doctor. And then the doctor would check them out and say, yeah, okay, this person has cancer, blah, 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 blah. And then they'd go, "Be healed!" And then they would take the twin in to the doctor, and they would have the twin examined by the doctor, and the doctor would be like, "This person is healed!" Blah, 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 blah. And then they got a whole bunch of people to give them money and all kinds of stuff, expecting to be healed or turned into immortal. So, anyway, and none of it was true. Like I said, government authorized delusion, in part with the Vatican. Anyway, and then later on, you have, I believe, Bill Gates or someone basically doing the Middle Eastern Bibles, which basically tell all the girls to basically submit to the male, whatever. So anyway, and that's, I forget if that's Bill Gates or someone, but basically turning the Middle East into basically trying to get the girls to submit to men and stuff like that. And like I said, all the Nazi stuff, if you just go back and search basically the Harvard newsletters, Harvard had its own little printing press where it printed its like daily paper or something like that, and you'll see a bunch of Nazi stuff printed inside of the Harvard daily newspapers or flyers that were being printed in Harvard. So anyway, and also Yale. So anyway, that's basically a breakdown of pretty much everything that was happening. So anyway, and pretty much explains what was going on. And like I said, the war statistics or the war loss rates for how many people died in Germany and died blah, 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 don't really make sense until you apply all the people who went to Harvard and Yale who died. And mostly you look at the football team, and there was a steroid project turning basically the football players of Harvard and Yale into basically soldiers by steroiding them up quite excessively, to the point of actual brain damage, basically. Way beyond what you should. Originally, it was a Germany or Russian project, basically, but of course JFK, Richard Nixon or Jimmy Carter basically took it over and basically started pumping up a whole bunch of volunteers or basically football players until it became nothing but muscle-bound, whatever. And then he shipped them over to Germany and to basically have them be Yankees, and basically going over there getting them to steal the frames and the painting frames. Like I said, there's a bunch of gold in Germany, a bunch of gold in Europe. Basically, inside the museums, all the paintings had golden frames, and you see actually some of the golden frames that were pulled out of Chernobyl. It was just like those frames, except basically with bigger and huge, basically great big gold frames, solid gold frames around every painting, and solid silver painting frames around every painting, basically in Germany and Europe and all over the place. So they stole the gold frames and basically just left the paintings, and that's why there's a whole bunch of paintings lying around basically Europe and stuff like that, but no gold frames. Not that I really care about the gold; they just melted it down and turned it into coins or whatever. And eventually ends up being in Fort Knox anyway, as I'm printing dollar bills and basically printing cash. So they just turned it in for the cash. and basically all the gold gets returned into Fort Knox. So it ends up being back there anyway. Like I said, there's a bunch of cups. There's a bunch of other stuff that I had like 4 or 10 castles basically.